This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, so we are 2 weeks away from Election Day here in Rhode Island. Early voting has already started. And, you know, when we talk about the gubernatorial race, obviously here in Rhode Island, most people, I think, quite frankly, are going to think of the two major parties. They're going to think of Governor Dan McKee. They're going to think of Ashley Kalus, the Republican. But the reality is that there are 5 candidates on the ballot, and one of whom is representing the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island, the Libertarian nominee, Elijah Gizzarelli, who joins us here this morning on the podcast. Good morning, sir. Thanks for the time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So what is that behind you? Is that Antarctica? You've got a map behind you there.
It's a map of the world. It is a weird map, right?
Oh, I see it now. Yeah, I see it now. Yep.
They like superimpose the moon over all the land masses, and then the oceans are all stars. It's weird.
Yeah. It's interesting also looking at it from that angle, because for the listeners, where the map is upside down from what we would conventionally imagine. Also, Africa is much more centered, and it looks like Africa is somewhat properly sized related to Europe, which is not typically the case in the version of the map that we're presented growing up, so to speak.
Yeah, there's actually a cool Newsweek, I think that was the name of the show, a Newsweek episode where they kind of talk about how our map's weird, and it's for navigation purposes. But the reason why I hang it upside down is because there's no real reason to think of north as up and south as down. Right? It does not matter. And so it's just when you actually turn the map upside down, it really makes the land masses look very different, right? Mm-hmm. And so it just really changes your perspective. Like, this is the United States. It looks very, very different than what you probably have in your mind, right? And so it just is a way to remind me that the world isn't always how you look at it, and that it's good to flip things upside down sometimes to get a different perspective.
Definitely. A lot of things could use that sort of litmus test of like how much of it is invented for either just convention or just for some specific reason, like you mentioned, navigation, which, yeah, of course, you've got to have some kind of consistent understanding of the layout of point A to point B, whether it's maritime navigation, walking, whatever, obviously aerospace. But yeah, that's it definitely is a reminder anytime I see someone who has a map of the world displayed outside of the version of events that we're presented with. It's always a good sign at a certain level, that at least you're willing to, go that basic step outside of the box. So why are you running for governor? What I know that, so we'll put it this way. There's a backstory to the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island is not a recognized party the way that the Republican or Democratic parties are here. The state doesn't sponsor, so to speak, primaries. You have to work to get on the ballot. Technically, you're an independent on these ballots. So there's always a goal, whether it's libertarian, moderate, whatever the case may be, to achieve the 5% threshold in a general election so that the party can be established as a balloted party going forward. How much of your campaign right now is based on that specific goal? How much of it is about an activist type of approach? Because I heard you say at a debate that you don't actually think you're going to win this election.
Whoa. I didn't say that. So, I mean, I have no delusions of my chances, right?
Gotcha. That's fair. That is actually what you said.
Yeah. If I win, right, I am very prepared to win. I think I would do a much better job than both Kalus or McKee, right? This isn't just me running for the sake of running to put my name on the ballot. No, right? I believe I would do a much better job than my opponents. If I could sit down with every single voter in Rhode Island, and McKee could sit down with them, and Kalus could sit down with them, I guarantee I would win that election, right? But that's not how we play the game, right? And so, the 5% thing is because a lot of people don't realize this, but the Democrat and Republican Party are not associated with the U.S. government in any way, shape, or form. They are private, right? And they get to make the rules during elections. And so it behooves them to make it difficult for anybody who's not a Democrat or Republican. And so they do different things. They stalled my campaign for over a month, saying that we didn't do well enough to get on the ballot, even though we had, right? And so that took away a month of campaigning from a campaign that's already under-resourced compared to the Democrats and Republicans. It's terrible what they do, right? And so what this 5% would do it would make the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island actually recognized as a party in Rhode Island. We're like one of the only states where they don't even recognize us as a party. The Libertarian Party is the third largest party in the nation. It's the only party that's growing over, I think, the past 10 years, right? And so the Libertarian Party, right, really deserves a seat at the table here in Rhode Island. They're forcing us to operate as a political action committee. They tie our hands with what we can do with campaign finance and all that stuff. It's a real uphill battle, right? And so that 5%, right, will go towards something like a pragmatic step forward, definitely, right? That said, right, recently somebody approached me and said that, you know, I was stealing votes away from Callis, right? And it's like, look, man, like 20,000 people showed up to the Republican primary. 110,000 people showed up to the Democratic primary. Callis cannot win this election. She really can't. I don't believe it's possible for her. I would be surprised if she breaks 35% on her best day. On her best day, right? Rhode Islanders have decided that they don't want Republicans anymore, right? And that's just the decision that's happened. And so I honestly believe that if it was me versus Dan McKee in a head-to-head, I would win. So no, even if I dropped out, even if the other independents dropped out, Callis still wouldn't win. But if Callis dropped out and endorsed me, I would win.
So they would certainly disagree with that. They say that they have internal polling that shows they're closing the gap with Governor McKee. Whatever the case may be, I mean, who knows how this is actually going to play out. Generally, if you're on the ballot, you know, there's a convention that you are, as an opposition figure, are likely to get 35, 37, 38%, no matter what. Like, we'll probably see Pat Cortellesa in the Secretary of State race against Greg Amore. He'll probably get 35, 37% just because of the way that things typically go in an election in terms of an opposition figure. But the notion that the Libertarian Party is, quote unquote, a Diet Coke or some kind of version of the Republican Party, that is something that I think also a lot of libertarians are trying to distinguish themselves as. We're not just like a break off of Republicans. If you look at Europe, the notion of libertarian is actually more associated with anarcho-syndicalism and the left. Here in the US, it's become kind of like a version of the Republican Party. You know, some people identify it with, you know, I don't know, like fatigues or something like that. But to explain to me what you want out of your party.
So confuse us with liberals. I get that a lot. Like, sometimes people will be like, there's no way I'm voting for a liberal. And I'm like, wait, what? But here's the thing, right? In the past, libertarian candidates have done a poor job of describing what a libertarian is, right? Gary Johnson did a poor job when he said that we're fiscally conservative and socially whatever the heck you want, right? Like, that was his thing. Okay, yeah, that kind of describes libertarianism, right? But that's not what a libertarian is, right? That's like the angle. So what's very important to understand about libertarianism is that it's a philosophy, right? First, we were a philosophy long before we were a political party, right? Libertarianism is the opposite of authoritarianism, right? So authoritarians, they want power. They want to control how everything works. Libertarians are the exact opposite. We believe in a more dispersed power, right? So that all the way down to the individual, you get to be the ultimate decision maker in your life. It shouldn't be the government making choices for you. It should be you making the choices. And that's what at the core of libertarianism is. Now, libertarianism is a very wide thought range. anything that opposes authoritarianism is by definition libertarianism. So libertarians, we love to fight. If you ever come to a libertarian convention, we get people from all different sorts, and all we do is argue about these like little minutiae. It's kind of fun if you like to argue about philosophy and stuff, right? But so what libertarians offer politically in a political party is reducing the government's effect on your life. And now that messaging right there is appealing to a lot of Republicans, a lot of Republican voters, I should say, because Republican politicians never live up to that. They always increase the size of government, right? But it's appealing to a lot of Republican voters. The problem is that when you communicate it like that, people on the left generally hear Republicanism, right? And so the best way to really talk about libertarianism is consent, right? Libertarians do not want to violate anybody's consent, right? Like right now, the way our government operates is just, it only ever violates people's consents. It only goes against what you want, and it forces you to do things that you don't want. Who wants to contribute to the genocide going on in Yemen right now? I don't know a single American that's like, yeah, we should totally be giving military arms to the Saudis so that they can persecute a genocide in Yemen. Like, I don't know any Americans that say that, but our government is doing that, and they're forcing us to pay for it, right? And so this is violating your consent. You don't want to do it, but now you're forced to do it, right? And so libertarians want to see a world where everybody's consent is respected.
Let's extrapolate that down to Rhode Island, because I would agree that when you talk about foreign policy, you know, the hands-off versus hands-on dynamic is something that I don't think, first of all, a lot of people pay attention to the reality of. But then I agree that most people, if you ask them, if you polled them and said, hey, situation A, go through each continent and explain U.S. foreign policy, I think you're right that most people would agree that a lot of the actions are, although some people would say, well, you know, isn't this something to do with a war on terror or something like, or protecting, you know, our security or whatever it may be, that even if that's not even close to accurate, some people may take that approach. I think you're right. Most people would take a hands-off approach or at least a defensive approach in these types of conflicts, as you described.
I usually get people saying things like, well, you know, we don't know all the facts. Yeah, so
definitely. But extrapolating this, so you're running for governor of Rhode Island. Let's look at it from that perspective. Right now, you know, the governor of Rhode Island is facing a scenario where the state is flush with COVID cash, which is something that is being deployed in its current phase in a somewhat of a trickle out. But the great challenges right now are housing, infrastructure, education, potentially managing COVID, managing the livability of the average person. So taking that libertarian philosophy to statewide government, if you were elected, what does your administration look like? How would you deploy those types of that type of philosophy in a role that is more akin to a CEO, even though business and government are very different, there's no question in terms of private sector, public sector, but is more akin to CEO than it is to a policymaker in Washington, D.C.? With the increasing legalization of cannabis across the country, including most recently Rhode Island, the cannabis industry is growing at a rapidly accelerating pace. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, well, the University of Rhode Island has a program to help educate you in the evolving space. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, the online certificate program covers topics related to product development, chemical analysis and testing, and patient and customer therapeutics. The next application deadline for the spring 2023 session is November 29th, and courses start January 10th. Join them at 2 upcoming info sessions and learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis or give them a call at 401-874-5280.
So the first thing that is very important to understand is a lot of people will ask me when they find out I'm running for governor, or they'll ask me after a speech I give, they'll say like, oh, so what are you going to do for me? Right. And it's like, no, like you totally misunderstand me. Right. It's not what I'm going to do for you. Right. It's what I'm going to stop doing to you, right? And this is what Rhode Islanders have lived under for a long time now, is the government has been doing terrible things to us economically, socially, and they should not be accepted, right? And so Rhode Island would run a lot better, and it would be better for everybody across the board if the government stopped doing things to people. And so, for example, the centerpiece of my campaign has been the drug war, right? And so this drug war has been an economic disaster here in Rhode Island. And Rhode Island is by far, far and away from the worst state in the country. Don't get me wrong, as far as persecuting the drug war. But still, the amount that we persecute it here is still so detrimental to everybody involved, right? So it's very hard to find statistics on how much it costs per prisoner. I've done my hardest. Apparently, you need a FOIA request, and even then, the FOIA request doesn't really help, right? And so I've got it down to, at minimum, over $70,000 per prisoner we pay for, right?
Per year.
Per year. And before COVID, right, the statistic was 50,000, and that was ranked the 5th highest in the country at 50,000. Now we're at over 70,000 minimum. And I had somebody tell me last night that it's actually closer to 150,000 per year, right? So the amount of money we're spending to imprison people here in Rhode Island is astronomical, okay? And on top of that, we have people in there that have never harmed anybody, right? So we have people, nonviolent drug offenders in prison that they've never harmed anybody. The've never stolen from anybody. They've been convicted for only having a substance, something that they were going to put in their own body, their own personal choice. They're being persecuted because of that, right? And Rhode Island taxpayers are paying out the nose. The average Rhode Islander makes $35,000 a year, right? So we're talking, it takes 2 or 3 Rhode Islanders working day and night in order to keep these people imprisoned. And we're taking them away from their families. We're taking them away from their sons and daughters, their mothers and fathers. And by the way, having a single parent, right, is the #1 predictor of criminality. It's the #1 predictor of low income. It's the #1 predictor of suicide and depression, right? So taking these people away from their children hurts our society here in Rhode Island a lot. It hurts our communities, right? And obviously, everybody knows that the drug war is notoriously targeted towards minority communities and communities of color. So this is a horrible thing that's going on in the state. And if we literally, if the next governor for 4 years only ended the drug war, we would not only save millions of dollars, right, in persecuting this drug war, millions and millions that could be put towards other things, right? But we would be doing Rhode Island families and the economy a big boost by putting these people back in. And that's just one thing, right? On top of that, we have the government regulations, and the taxes in the state are so high. I think that we're we're 43rd or we're like the 7th or something highest tax state in the country. That's crazy, right? There's no reason why Rhode Islanders should be taxed so high. We are the smallest state and tied for the most densely populated state. That means we have less roads per person. We have less bridges per person by far. We have less infrastructure in general per person. Even things like trash pickup is easier to do here in Rhode Island than just about any other state. So why on earth are Rhode Islanders being taxed the most? We're being taxed so much, and we're getting back very, very little. There's an element of corruption within our system where we're making sure people are getting paid behind the table in backdoor deals, and that's got to stop, right? And so another thing I talk about a lot is education, right? We need to go through what's happening in our education system. It's a travesty. Rhode Island spends over $20,000 per student, okay? Over 20, Zach Hurwitz, he's one of the independents on the ballot, right? he's talking about just giving free lunches to people. Like he's going to make sure, like that's his main issue. He wants to make sure that no Rhode Island child goes hungry. So he wants to ensure free lunches for all students. And it's like, I worry that he would just raise taxes in order to get that done, right? But here's the thing. We don't need to raise taxes to get that done. We spend over $20,000 per student, right? So if you just double, like right now we spend $2.75 per school lunch, right? And the lunches are horrible, right? These kids are being malnourished. I remember when I went, it was terrible. I heard that they actually went way down since. So, I mean, if we doubled the price of each meal, like so from $2.75 up to $5.50, right? And we gave them all away for free to that one child that we're spending $20,000 with on already. That's less than $1,000 per year. Less than $1,000 per year, and we're spending $20,000 on that student, right? The average classroom size is much more than 20, but let's just say it's a classroom size of 20. The teacher only makes $70,000 a year. That means that there's $400,000 being allocated to that one class. Where's the rest of this money going? The teacher's benefits? Let's say her benefits are twice as much, right? As we'll say it's $150,000 with her salary and benefits altogether. There's $250,000 unaccounted for in our education system. And we can't give away these school lunches for free at much higher quality. That's crazy. The politicians in the state are mismanaging your money and they're malnourishing your children. It's not okay.
Let's go back to the drug war concept, which I think obviously the war on drugs has failed. There's no question about that. You know, that's a clear data-driven statement. But as governor of Rhode Island, how can you end the war on drugs? What would that look like? Because can you come in? You're not going to be able to come in on day one with an executive order and say all police departments heretofore may not arrest anybody for drug possession. I mean, you can use the bully pulpit, but what else can you do as governor? How would you execute these ideas?
Okay, so on day one, I would sign a pardon for all nonviolent drug offenders currently in the ACI. And we'll send them back home to their families with an apology. I'm pretty sure I can sign a pardon for people even in city prison, city jails or whatever, waiting to go to the ACI or whatever. But my ability to free people being persecuted for the drug war is absolute. Right. I can pardon anybody I want. So there's that. Right. If I am currently pardoning anybody, I don't see why any police officer would try to arrest people for drug offenses. You'd have to be a real jerk to be arresting somebody just for them to get a pardon a couple weeks later. Right. So I think just that act alone would effectively end the drug war in the state. Now, of course, I can use the bully pulpit, and there's probably other things as governor I would be able to do to put pressure on local municipalities if it came to that, right? But I don't think it would.
What backdoor deals and examples of corruption are you aware of when you cite that?
It's obviously they're backdoor deals, and good luck trying to even find the budget in this state, right? Go ahead, try to Google the Rhode Island budget. Try. You will not find any hard numbers. You will not find anything that even gives you an inkling of what's going on in the state's budget.
Well, we know the total number going into next year. I think it's $13.6 billion.
Yeah, but if you actually try to see a breakdown of what they're spending, the best you can get is on one of the websites. I think it says breaks it down by weird political pandering topic. It's how we're going to support communities, and it just says random numbers. It's $70 million is going to this.
That sounds like the governor's 2030 ri2030.com, the layout, that's not the actual state budget. That's essentially a campaign website, unless I'm the way the state budget is written is explicit in terms of allocation.
Yeah. So yeah, good luck trying to find it. I've spent like well over a couple hours trying to find it. I can't find it. But anyway, so it's really hard to pin them down on a specific thing. But we all know it happens, right? Like we all know, right? The website thing with Gina Raimondo, that whole thing.
Deloitte.
Like, yeah, she spent over $300 million building a website that didn't end up working. She claimed that she was going to sue them, and 2 weeks later, they flew her out to Los Angeles to give a speech at their convention, right? Like, get out of here, right? Like, you have to be stupid not to come to a conclusion, right? I haven't looked into this specific topic myself, but Gina Raimondo also, I've heard accused by school teachers that she sold the teacher's pension fund to a New York company that she like has known for a long time. And now teachers are going to get less back and have to pay more into their pensions, right? And so there's like a whole bunch of things down the line where you can look at it and be like, this just doesn't smell right to me. And so, no, I can't make a specific allegation against McKee. I'm not going to pull a callus on stage and just be like, yeah, you're under. No, I'm not going to do that. We all know it. We all know that this corruption is happening. And when you break down those numbers that I already have, right? The amount of money we're spending per prisoner, $70,000 minimum, maybe double that, right? The average Rhode Islander makes $35,000 a year. How is it more expensive to be a prisoner in Rhode Island than it is to live the average lifestyle? It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to be corrupt, at least make it make sense. It just doesn't make any sense. We know that that's corruption. There's no way it actually costs $70,000 to imprison somebody. And those buildings are horrible buildings too. One of them's condemned. Like, it isn't like they're living in luxury over there.
How would you attract economic development to Rhode Island? We see a lot of push right now in the blue economy super sector, to an extent, the green economy. There's a tap dance that takes place with what some people would call corporate welfare and others would describe as an investment in our future. But how do you, whether you're talking about developing micro entities and small businesses or large scale super sectors, how do you attract talent and business to Rhode Island that can both fuel the economy directly and then also through employment?
I mean, it's actually not that hard. Unfortunately, right, we've been run by demagogues for quite some time, and they try to make the economy pigeonhole the economy in a certain way, right? But it's very, very easy. Connecticut is full of big government, Democrats that have high taxes. Massachusetts is full of big government Democrats that have high taxes. Rhode Island just needs to lower our corporate tax rate. And that's it. People will come here, people that want to do business in either Connecticut, Rhode Island, or Massachusetts. Rhode Island could become the hub of Southern New England just by lowering our corporate tax rate and making businesses a more favorable environment here. Then Boston is 45 minutes away. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Economically, that's certainly true. Rhode Island can take advantage of that just by lowering our corporate tax rate, right? And then on top of that, I mean, look, during COVID, they shut down our economy, right? They forced small businesses closed while forcing Rhode Islanders to go to these big box stores and spend millions and millions of dollars that went to billionaires who have never even stepped foot in Rhode Island, right? It was horrible what they did to our economy. And small business is the backbone of the state. It's what makes Rhode Island so amazing. And so, especially for small businesses, we should be having almost a tax holiday, I would say, for however long it takes to get these main streets up and running. I'm sick of driving through Rhode Island cities and towns and seeing business closure after business closure, empty lot after empty lot. it shouldn't be happening, right? We should empower Rhode Islanders to start their own business, get out from under the thumb of these corporate entities that have no interests in Rhode Island whatsoever, and start building our community that way.
Last couple of minutes here. One thing that I attended the Publix Radio Providence Journal debate where it was kind of a weird format. You guys had independent candidates run one platform, and earlier in the night, Republican and Democratic candidates were on another one. But regardless of that, there was a question that came from Tina Pedersen, who is disabled, and it had to do with businesses having a requirement for whether it's the installation of ramps, whatever it is, making sure that a business is accessible. And your argument was that the private sector would handle this on its own without government regulation, because if a business wants to attract maximum clientele or potential clientele, they ought to install a ramp or make their business accessible. At the same time, those in the disabled community would argue, well, we should be entitled to enter into any commercial space or any public space, I should say, the same way as anybody who is abled, and that by not requiring businesses to be ADA compliant or anything of that sort, you're isolating and further putting disabled folks at a disadvantage in terms of their own ability to navigate this world. So where do you stand on that type of scenario? Because that would suggest that you believe in, one, the goodness of the community without government regulation, and then also the economic, or I should say business acumen of someone to say, hey, look, I want to make sure anybody can get into my business. But do you really think people are that benevolent and that willing to go above and beyond to allow for everybody who is a part of our community to access a public space?
Well, this is actually one of the symptoms of having government do things it shouldn't, right? Is we get a delegation of responsibility in our society that just wouldn't exist otherwise, right? So many people, right? And I've known people that literally I've seen them being asked to donate to a charity. And they say, why would I donate to that? That's the government's job, right? I pay my taxes. They literally say that out loud to the person asking, right? And it's like, no, that's not the government's job, right? And so just because we don't believe that the government should do something doesn't mean that we don't believe that the community shouldn't do something. And as a community, the much more social thing to do is to put, social pressure on people in order to do it. If you see a business where it's hard for a disabled person to get in, you can speak up and be like, hey, you know what? You should put a ramp outside, and put that kind of pressure. Maybe organize, some sort of organization that goes around and makes sure that, people, that businesses are complying, and then put pressure on them in certain ways. Like, listen, we're going to organize a boycott of this business unless you start, being better. Like, these are different things that are perfectly valid to do in a free market, right? Because, not every business owner is going to think, oh, well, maybe somebody's going to break their leg and not be able to get into my business, right? But it happens. And so I think that that's the route that we go, right? When we ask the government to do things, they do it they do it in such there's no emotion or feeling behind it. It's a very callous thing. And what it does is, the point I made on stage was that, listen, we can't be forcing these types of standards on people that are struggling to stay in business as it is, right? And so what happens is, if a business has to close because it can't meet ADA compliance standards, right, then the whole community misses out on that business's service, right? It doesn't make sense, right? Now, if that business is able to stay open for a while and start making money, maybe a couple years down the line, they will be able to afford to put in a ramp, right? But forcing people to do these kinds of things, one, is not the government's job, right? It is not the government's job to police how businesses run their business. right? The government's job is to keep us safe, right? At the best, the government's job is to keep us safe. It's to provide a place for redress, such as courts, right? It's that kind of thing. The government's job is not to run the economy so that every different kind of customer gets their ideal. Because what happens is when you start stacking these regulations up, prices go up. And then we say, oh, why are there so many people that can't afford basic things? Like, I'm sorry, I'm jumping here a little bit, but we see this in healthcare, right? People are like, why is it so expensive in healthcare? Well, because there's so many regulations. Like, look at how many regulations. That's not the only problem. Don't get me wrong. I could talk a long time about the prices of healthcare, right? But like, there's so many regulations. And not to mention, our judges, for whatever reason, have decided that even if a doctor tries really hard to help somebody and they harm them in any way possible, then they get sued. Right. And it's so now if you look at the bag of a saline bag of IV fluid, right, it costs $1 to manufacture. The average cost of that same bag on your doctor's bill is $350. That's not the administration of that bag. It's just for the bag. So how does it go from $1 to make plastic and salt water to $350? It's insane, right? And this is part of the reason. It's because we have this ideal, like, oh, we should all live up to this very, very high standard. Well, that high standard has a very high price. And so if you want to talk about the cost of housing, the housing prices, well, you have to relax regulations when it comes to housing. If you want every single house to be built to this incredibly high standard and you need to pay tons of money for all kinds of inspections of things that don't even matter, like, it's like, okay, well, the economy is going to suffer. People aren't going to be able to afford to do that. And now they're going to be homeless. What is worse, living in a house that might not be perfect in every single way, or being homeless? We have to make these decisions as a society. And so people always like to paint these types of regulations in a way that it's like, this is protecting people. No, it's harming people. They're not looking at the harm these things do. Building a ramp costs money. It takes time. It takes energy. And it might not be time and energy somebody can spare. So no, we shouldn't be forcing people to do it. I wish every single disabled person had as easy access to every single building as possible. I'm willing to work for a world where that happens. I'm not willing to force business owners to do it or force them to close. That's not what I'm willing to do.
There's a lot we could get into, and I'm sure down the line we will. Real quick, do you think that let's say you're elected governor? Okay, that's one scenario. Let's say scenario B is you're not elected. Where do you see yourself going from here in terms of politics, or is that something that you can't even get into until after November 8th?
Well, I'm still planning on winning. So, no, right now I'm going to school full time. I've been working and stuff as well. So I've been extremely busy. So I've not thought about 4 years in the future or 2 years in the future or whatever. If there is a public office in a couple of years, I think that maybe, I want to take a swing at, maybe I'll do that. Right. In 4 years from now, if I'm not happy, like if I'm looking at the Republican and Democrat and I'm thinking, wow, these two are both terrible again, then maybe I'll run for governor again. Right. I'll have to see it as, as we go. I don't make any decision. Like, I'm not running for governor for the sake of running for governor. I'm doing it for a very specific reason.
Elijah Gizzarelli, he is an independent candidate for governor running under the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island banner, one of 5 candidates on the ballot. And hey, early voting is already underway. Election day is November 8th. Thanks for your time, man.
Yeah. Be excellent to each other, everybody.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.